Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book which I thought was fascinating. I saw the title, Ownership of Satellites. It's a book which has been edited by Mahulena, if I've pronounced that correctly, Hofmann, and Andreas Loukakis. The book's come to us from Hart Publishing and is also linked to Nomos as well. And it's spreading, the title we've given this review is Spreading the Message on Space, Satellites and Space Law. Recording this in the summer of 2017, the book's appeared this year. We are actually on the cusp of some big changes, I think, in the way that we, within Europe and internationally, view what we're doing with space, satellites industry, the whole concept of contracts, the development of space, which is the final frontier, as it's been called. And we've got to start thinking even now about what is a very different way of perhaps doing things, because that certainly is a big future for industry as we get towards the middle of this century. This is the book here, it's a blue cover. It's volume 9 of Luxembourg Legal Studies. You see it's mentioned there. And it mentions the two editors, and it's the 4th Luxembourg workshop on space and satellite communication law. And you can see the Hart, and that's part of course of Bloomsbury, Hart Publishing, and you've got the Nomos logo as well. The book is just under 300 pages. There's no index right at the back, but what you do have is the authors who are involved in this work. And you can see there are a large number of them. I'm not going to go through the names. And then you've got the back of the last chapter, so there's no actual index as such. But you've got at the front, because it's a workshop of information, that's the front page. It's volume 9, as I say, of the whole series. It's based, it's as far as Hart are concerned, it's just this one hardback cover. There's only the front and the spine. There's nothing on there's nothing on the back of the book at all, but you can see the spine there and the front. For Hart, it's just the hardcover, and for Nomos, you've got a PDF which you can have. Then you've got the table of contents, which is structured in the preface, and then it works all the way through. And each one of the chapters is actually it's identified as to who's written it in the actual heading itself, and then right at the back, as I say, you have the information about the authors. Then the preface is set up. This is explaining what the 4th Luxembourg workshop was up to. Karim Michael Saba is the person who has actually written the preface, and he gives some information as to what it's all about. Then you have got the General Counsel, John Purvis, talking again about the whole purpose of the satellite communication law workshop. And then we move on to actually the second chapter, which is Ownership of Satellites, a simple legal fact with complex consequences, written by Hofmann. Now, the point I'm making here is, it says the ownership of a satellite is an important legal title which empowers its owner or owners to use it, to collect its products, as well as to dispose of it. Now, that's going to be an interesting point if you think about one issue, and that is there are so many of them zipping around at the moment. We have got a real dustbin full of them up there, and something will have to be done one day, probably after my time on this earth, but something will have to be done. So at least we're now talking about who owns the satellites and what's going to happen. So what's in the book? Well, Elizabeth wrote the main basis of this review, which we put on the web and in the journals. And this is what I say, as the third decade of the 21st century approaches, we're getting there quite quickly, the realities of space travel and space-based activities and enterprise loom ever nearer. And make no mistake, possibilities become realities sooner rather than later. This isn't science fiction anymore. It isn't Dick Tracy or whoever these people are up in space. It's nothing to do with that. It's the reality of what we've actually done, not the fiction and all the acting. It's the actual people who've been involved, the people who've gone into space, what we've actually thrown up there, the various countries involved, the 500 odd people who've been astronauts, and so forth. Now, lawyers in whatever jurisdiction would therefore do well to familiarize themselves with the scope and complexities of space law, and I suggest that's an important area for the future, of which, of course, ownership of satellites, complex in itself, is but just one issue. That's really what we're talking about here. However, it's a wide-ranging issue, as ownership pertains to property, particularly the benefits, responsibilities and liabilities relating to it, and of course the law of contract itself, which I've indicated is an important possible future area for development of industries and all sorts of other matters, because it employs people, and we are looking at massive scientific developments over the next decades. And the relevance of the concept of ownership in space activities may be assessed from several standpoints, says Jean-Francis Mayens, one of the book's contributors, namely the legal standpoint, the economic standpoint, and the strategic standpoint. So it's legal, economic, strategic. The legal standpoint appears at the moment to be a subsidiary criterion, he says, although regulating restrictions must inevitably impinge on the commercial benefits and interests that conceivably will be generated by space activities. One of the outstanding features, we think, of this book is that it presents in one compact form from Hart and Nomos the combined expertise of its 23 contributors. Their list of credentials, which take up at least 10 pages at the back, include their links with top universities and the various agencies and institutions concerned with space law and related disciplines. And I have to say, after the thoroughly disgusting behaviour of everybody when the Apollo programme had finally landed Armstrong and Aldrin on the moon, and everybody turned their back on the whole issue, the very fickle general public reaction to what had happened, and the space industry then came to a grinding halt. The fact of the matter is that it's there, what was done in 1969 and what has happened since with the tremendous development of satellite technology and the generation of space activities is ongoing, to use the expression, and therefore it's an area that we have been ignoring for so long that it's catching up with us. As I said about the problems of all the waste that's up in space in orbit, big problems could be developing there. Think about what's going to happen in the longer term on the moon and everything else. So there are, at the moment, at the end of the basically the 2017, 2018, we are looking at some big changes quite quickly. Now, as I've said, one of the important things is that it gives all the information in this one compact volume. It's only a small book as well, it's not a big book, but it's one of many that I'm sure are going to follow as this subject becomes much, much more important. The joint editors are Mahulena, if I can pronounce that correctly, Hofmann, and Andreas Loukakis. They both come from the University of Luxembourg, where Hofmann holds the SES chair in satellite communications and media law, whilst Loukakis is a postdoctoral research fellow who conducts research into space law under the same framework. And as I've said, this is an important area for the future, because we're talking about money, big money here, and we're talking about jobs. As satellites enable global digitization, robust legal systems, say the contributors, are needed, subject to international as well as regional law. And it's further stressed that laws relating to satellites developed 20 or 30 years ago are now increasingly unfit for the fast and evolving private commercialisation that shapes our space industry today. And it's become increasingly clear that the final frontier of space activity will be a legal one. And I'm glad to say, notwithstanding all the nonsense from the June 2017 general election and all the stalemates we've got, that at least in the Queen's speech they are now looking at producing in the UK Parliament some proper legislation in this area at long last. It's been so long overdue, but they are actually turning their attention to it and realising that something is going to have to be done sooner rather than later. And then looking at ahead for the next 20 to 30 years, who yet knows what new technological developments will emerge from the space industry and what legal frameworks will be needed to regulate their use and development. I would suggest a very large number, because one of the things is clearly manufacturing in space. That's got to be the next logical step once we start seeing many more people going up into space itself. As I said before, only 500 odd people have done so far, which is a very small number. We've only had 12 people walking on the moon in total. That's if you believe it. I certainly do. All those idiots who don't are very stupid. We've also been, of course, to a lot of other places, like the main, all the planets, including Pluto, which is still a planet that's been visited, and we are beginning to see what is actually happening around us, and we should be knowing a lot more about it than we do. There's been complete and utter failure by many people to grasp this wonderful opportunity. It's now upon us. This book is giving us an indication, even with things like ownership of satellites, that we are so backward thinking as to what we should be doing. Let me conclude, because I've given you my view about why this book's important, why the issue is so important, which has not been addressed because they've been all navel gazing and talking about things that are really not that important. This one is. The conclusion then is it's one of those legal texts that is a truly exciting read, as well as an information-rich resource of references and expertise in the current legal realities that we have and the implications of satellite technology and its commercial spin-offs in the years to come. And I certainly think that is the position. I'm not going to change my views. I just would like to see a little bit more action and a little less of all this big sort of self-regard that's going on, when in fact we've got more important things to do. As such, then, we think that the book should attract the interest of a wide range of specialist practitioners, especially those at the beginning of their careers, because this subject is going to be a very big one in the years to come. The publication is cited at 2017, and I've recorded this in the summer of 2017, almost during a thunderstorm, I think. There's the book again, blue cover, nice blue cover for the what the Earth really looks like, because it is lovely and blue. There we go. The book itself, let's open it in the middle. Interrelation between space law and ITU law. I mean, that's obviously, again, the whole question of international relations concerning satellites, because remember what you're dealing with. With a satellite, it's not quite the same thing as a boat. This is not like maritime law. It's different by its very nature, because we are talking about everybody being involved, because the satellites are going around this planet and of course other planets too. Do look at the names of some of these people too. These are the people at the back, a huge number of contributors. Come from a very wide international grouping, all very highly qualified people. I'm sure you're going to see their names again. Don't ignore this book, because I think it's a very important precursor for what we've got to look forward to as we get towards the middle of the 21st century. Thank you anyway to everybody concerned. Bye-bye.